Sunitha,
So, good morning,
Rohit,
everyone.
Yeah, stop sharing. Thank
Yeah.
you, everyone.
So,
Thank you,
moving
Rohit.
on to the next section of today. I'm Sunitha Ramachandran. I'm a senior volunteer with Samaritans, Mumbai. And I must thank Rohit for a very wonderful and thorough overview on suicide, along with the statistics and the myths. It's really good that Rohit has also included a few myths on self-harm. So without further ado, I'll just share my screen so I can begin. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is, Sunitha.
Thank you so
I
much.
just need to start the slideshow and you can start on the top. Top right. There you go.
Okay, thank you so much. So Rohit had begun, he covered a couple of myths on self-harm as well. So I'm just going to be taking it forward from there. So before I just get into the presentation, I just want to again repeat what Sachin had shared as an answer to one of your questions. We are not mental health professionals. We are volunteers with Samaritans Mumbai, which is a helpline covering all kinds of queries or issues that people have on the emotional spectrum, right from stress, distress, all the way up to suicide. Self-harm is a very important component, which of late there has been a lot of discussion about, which is very welcome, that there is actually conversation around self-harm. While there is no age around it, but typically statistics has shown that self-harm emerges in younger people, typically during the adolescence or puberty, when there is a lot of hormonal changes and physical changes that the person is going through. At the same time, there is not too much control they have over what is their surroundings, whether it is their family life, whether it is school, whether it is the choices that they have to make. So there's a lot of lack of control that a young person may be feeling, which could lead them to harming themselves because either they are unable to cope with the pain or they want to take back some of the control, which they do not have. So that is why it mostly starts in younger people. However, it could continue well after adolescence has passed, well after puberty has passed. And therefore, this is something that needs a lot of attention and conversation around. So self-harm is not suicide. The reason I'm just wanting to linger on this is it doesn't mean that if someone is harming themselves that they want to take their lives. Again, you won't know until you ask them. You need to check with them whether they're harming themselves, whether they have any thoughts of taking their life. So it need not mean suicide. However, research has shown that there's a higher probability and a higher correlation among people who have been harming themselves for a long time to someone who may eventually land up attempting to take their life. So Rohit has already debunked the myth that it is attention seeking. And this is something that we continue to hear a lot of, that a person who's harming themselves is perhaps seeking attention. So attention seeking could imply that the person is not suffering, but in the case of self-harm, it's not true. They are suffering. So they may be seeking attention and dragging a little bit of focus onto the pain that they are going through internally. So it's a very, very good idea to help them to talk about it. So if they're seeking attention, let's give them the attention, but in the correct way. Give them an attention in terms of allowing them to open up and talk about what it is that they feel. It's not a cry for help. They do need help from an emotional point of view, because earlier there was a question about locus of control with regard to suicide. That may be equally true with regard to self-harm. Self-harm, while it's not caused only due to abuse, sexual abuse or other abuse, it could also be aggravated by that, and a person may be more vulnerable to it in terms of the way they cope with pain that is caused by something which is outside their control. Self-harm is not a fashionable or cool thing to do. Again, these are just myths, because young people also tend to talk like that, you know, the person is just trying to be cool. And so there's a lot of memes and a lot of, these kind of forwards and these kind of ways of looking at it. Now, not to take it in a very judgy way or to say that it is not, the reason I put it down so categorically as it's not is so that we give it the serious and sensitive attention that it needs. So the person is not trying to be fashionable or cool. The person is probably suffering inside. It's not something that can't be cured. So double negatives, but it can be helped. So it's not, self-harm is not a disease or something that cannot be cured. It's not a tendency or an urge that can never be overcome. It's like suicide. It is preventable. It is, but they need a lot of help. Sometimes just emotional help may not be enough because there may be things like abuse or family disharmony, bullying at school. There could be so many other elements that you may not be able to control, but what you can do is help to relieve some of the stress by helping them to talk about it. It's definitely not mad or weird. That's an inverted quotes because we never use those words, but these words are generally used. This is a very alarming thing that is quite common in 1 in 10 teenagers self-harm. This is an international statistic and it could be applicable in India. If suicide is underreported in India, then trust me, self-harm is way, way underreported. So it's hard for us to put a finger on it, but I can tell you from our experience at Samaritans that when we open up conversations on self-harm, there are a lot of people who are ready to open up and talk about it. So it's far more prevalent than perhaps what you think it is. And it's not done because people enjoy the pain. Yes, there is an element of being able to take the pain. So when we speak to a lot of people who are harming themselves, some of the things that they share is that there's like so much internal pain and they don't know how to express it. So when they're harming themselves, the external pain on the body is helping them to deal with the internal pain. So that's something that you might have heard as well. And we hear that from a lot of people. And the other thing is the complete lack of control that they are struggling to accept and to handle, that taking back some amount of control, the only control they may have is on their body. So deliberate self-harm, self-injury or non-suicidal self-injury, which is why I said self-harm is not suicide. But typically self-harm is discussed in a non-suicidal context. Of course, there could be accidental deaths due to self-harm that, the person has died accidentally. So that is a different thing. So suicide is a very different topic from self-harm. So basically it's an intentional and direct injuring of the body tissue. Most of us know self-harm as people who cut themselves, but it could be that they hit their head against the wall. It could be that they're biting their nails. It could be that, they're plucking at their skin or eating their hair or tugging at it. So there are even excessive alcohol or drug abuse. All these are ways of self-harm as well. So it's a coping mechanism. For many of them, it's a coping mechanism just to handle the internal pain. And definitely it's a way to communicate distress. When they have no control, they're not able to handle pain. This is one way in which they're communicating it. And as I said, it's just to feel better or to regain some amount of control. There's an element of punishing themselves because there's a lot of shame that the person may be feeling while they're doing this, and they could have mental illness or depression as well. So very quickly, I'll just take you through this, and this is only important from the point of view of understanding how to support someone who's self-harming. So the person who's self-harming is feeling a lot of hyper stress. They feel overwhelmed, unable to cope. And then there is a trigger that is going to just send them where they're not able to handle it, and then they injure themselves. The minute they injure themselves, they'll end up feeling relieved and in control or a little calmer because there's been an external outlet to what they've gone through internally. There could be a sense of dissociation and feeling numb or lost. And so the self-harm helps them to feel real and connected. So this is just two branches, but obviously self-harm is a topic that is quite nuanced, and there are very many explanations in between these and even beyond these. So the cycle that happens, and this is where our work is really important and relevant, is a person is feeling emotional suffering, then they feel an emotional overload where there is a trigger or a sense of panic, and then they harm themselves. There is a sense of calmness or a temporary relief from what they've been suffering. But very often after that, there is a lot of shame or a grief, because the shame they feel is because they harm themselves, they feel guilt, they feel shame, and that leads back into emotional suffering. So self-harm is also tragic from the point of view simply of how it's cyclical. In the short run, it may relieve pain, but in the long run, it's actually making the problem probably more difficult for them to handle. So the signs that you can look out for is a lot of time, even during weird weather. I mean, during hot weather, people are wearing long sleeves and long pants. They try to hide the evidence of self-harm or hide the marks or the scars that may be there. Then they're wearing wristbands. So basically, if you find any unexplained scars or marks on the body or any injuries that don't make sense, but more than all of this, look for any abnormally secretive or elusive behavior. The person is hiding a lot. A person is very reclusive and they're not engaging. So there is no judgment in this. There is just exploration. So all of this is not for you to lead to not to lead to any conclusions, but to understand that we need to start conversations and help them to express themselves. We can help by conveying our empathy and acceptance. If they're already feeling shame and guilt, not to contribute to that by burdening them, by saying that, it's a wrong thing what you are doing, or help them to seek help in a way that they are comfortable to do. So not to push them, but to be there and talk to them and explore how they are feeling and simply accept their feelings, whatever they are feeling. It's not about being a cry for attention or cowardice or anything like that. It's what they are feeling, and just to take it and to help them to talk about it. Building and maintaining trust is the most difficult thing, because you could land up promising confidentiality, but you may not be able to maintain it, because if you feel the person is at risk, or if you feel that the family has to be involved or mental health professionals have to be involved, you need to do it. But the how you maintain trust is to talk to them about it first. So one very important component, whether it's in suicide or self-harm, is to maintain the trust that you have built with the person, but do not take it on yourself alone, because it's not possible for one person to handle and help. You need to have many people involved, because it's literally it takes a village to save one person's emotional pain and distress. So convey your care, convey your warmth, offering up follow-up support and care. Of course, at Samaritans as a helpline, we don't do that, but in your life, when you do, offering up the support and care is extremely important. Maybe take lead, give them our helpline as a support, for example, mental health support. Give them the support resources that they can reach out to. And most importantly, the person is really feeling a lack of respect in their lives, to continue giving them the respect and the confidentiality. That's it from my side. Over to you, Sachin. I'm going to stop screen sharing, and if there are any questions.
Thank you, Sunitha. Just spotlight here. If there are any questions, any quick questions, please feel free to mention in the chat so that we can address them, or we can even ask the questions once I continue with the risk factors of suicide. So let's try to do that then. Sunitha, we can address the questions whenever they come up.
Absolutely. Over to you, Sachin.
Thank you, Sunitha. Okay, so let me share my screen. I hope everyone is able to see my screen. If I could get a confirmation, please.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'll be taking the conversation ahead from self-harm to suicide. Like Sunitha mentioned, self-harm and suicide are different in nature. In fact, someone who's feeling suicidal ideation, self-harm could also, like was mentioned, self-harm tends to be a coping mechanism. So in fact, when someone is going through suicidal ideation themselves, self-harm can even be a coping mechanism for someone who is going through suicidal ideation, when the need, or when things get really hard for them to kind of deal with the emotions, and the state of overwhelmness kind of goes really overboard, then self-harm can be used by some people as a coping mechanism to deal with those intense emotions as well. So taking from there, let's address some risk factors for suicide, right? And now, what do we First of all, it is important to understand that um, when we're talking about suicidality, or suicidal ideation for that matter, the causes for that is always multifactorial. Now, Rohit had addressed at some point in the conversation that it's not a binary effect or a linear reason that this person died because their girlfriend left them or they got bad marks and things like that. It's not always a simple linear connection or a superficial understanding like that. In fact, the risk factors that lead to suicidality are many, and we are going to address some of that. So, before that, what are risk factors? Now, risk factors are characteristics or conditions that increase the chance that a person may try to take their life. Anything, any conditions, any characteristics, physiological, environmental, anything that increases a chance for a person to start feeling suicidal. Those are what we consider as risk factors. They normally add vulnerability for suicide, towards suicide to the person, and place the person at an elevated risk of suicide. Now, it was discussed in the statistics as well. Risk factors can vary by age group, culture, sex, and other characteristics. What we have noticed in India, there is no particular age bracket that is showing a higher level of suicide amongst them, though post 18 years of age, that particular bracket definitely increases the number of suicides attempted. Now, one of the first factors of risk factors for suicidality includes the generic, if we have to consider the health of a person, right? So health issues such as comorbidity or even long-term health issues such as depression, so major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders. In fact, even substance abuse disorders can lead a person towards suicidality. Now, in fact, there was internationally a research was done, a multi-country research was done, whereby those who had died by suicide, there was brain scan done on people who had died by suicide. And upon the brain scan, the definitively what we were able to understand is 60 to 80% of the people. Now, 60 to 80% because it's different number in different countries, but 60 to 80% of people who died by suicide showed signs of mental health disorder. Now, because mental health disorders are either curable or manageable, what we are essentially thereby able to also conclude is that suicide becomes a highly preventable form of death as well. Mainly because if 60 to 80% of it is coming from mental health disorders, which are manageable and curable, hence the control over suicidality also is possible. Substance abuse. Now, it's more of an unwritten law to kind of understand that if someone is having suicidal ideation, one of the best things that can be done is to remove alcohol from that equation. If the person also abuses alcohol or any other drugs for that matter, alcohol being more important in this because it acts uh, uh, as an inhibition factor. I mean, it reduces inhibition for amongst people. It increases the risk-taking ability of a person as well. So these increase. So by that, alcohol increases the chance of a suicidal attempt, and hence, it's very important to identify that if there is alcohol involved, it's very, very important to get alcohol away from that equation. Next, personality traits of aggression, mood changes. So the person's personality itself may act as a hindrance for them to develop good coping skills whenever they are feeling overwhelmed or they are going through prolonged periods of stress. So if personality traits of aggression, mood changes, and poor relationships exist, then the coping skills that the person may have to deal with the pain that they may be perceiving or experiencing also changes, right? So it can lead to suicidal ideation as well. The physical health conditions of a person. Now, if a person is dealing with chronic pain or comes to know about a terminal illness, disease that they are experiencing, chronic illnesses, long-suffering health conditions, and also if there is comorbidity of them. So if there is diabetes, if a person who's going through depression just got diagnosed with diabetes as well. Now, these are life-affecting illnesses that tend to be there for a longer duration. So if a person perceives that to be an addition to the pain that they are experiencing, it can lead to suicidal ideations as well. Next, traumatic physical injury to the brain. Now, it has been observed that I believe, if I'm getting the numbers correct, over 35% of people who have experienced trauma to the brain, that is physical, accidents or anything of that sort, where the brain got impacted, tend to show, and this is post their healing, even post 6 months of healing, they have shown signs of suicidality to start arising as well. So there is a very strong connection between injury to the brain and also developing future suicidal ideation as well. So something to be aware of and be mindful of. So those were the health related issues. Now, along with in this particular thing, I would also like to add some more things. For example, hormones that a person has. So hormonal changes can happen when a person is going through different life changes. So for example, we have heard of postpartum depression. So pregnancy, even getting into teenage years, the hormones that the hormonal flooding that happens to us as human beings can also lead to experiencing pain. So the definition of suicide being when the pain of living exceeds the fear of dying, right? So when this pain or perceived pain or experienced pain is so high that even the fear of death being there, it is getting exceeded by that pain. And hence that can lead to suicidal ideation as well. So hormonal, physiological, personality traits, substance abuse, mental health disorders. Sorry, was that someone wanting to come? Okay, so I'll continue. So post health, let's look at the other factors, environmental risk factors. Now, this mainly revolves around prolonged stress or chronic stressful conditions like harassment, bullying, violent behavior. So ostracization from a community. So this has been very a lot of research has been done internationally. However, I'm not sure of any papers that has been released in India, where, for example, the transgender community, the ostracization that they feel, the rate of suicide is extremely high amongst the transgender community. Now, this is a straight example that we can pick in terms of understanding if there is ostracization that a person experiences, like harassment, bullying, violent behavior, and that too in a chronic manner, that too over an extended period of time, then in combination with the other factors, health factors and the other factors involved as well, can lead to suicidal ideation. Relationship problems, rejection, divorce, unemployment or financial crisis. So any major life event, right? Life transition. It may even include that you had to move your home. So changing of places, expecting any tragic news, or expecting that there will be loss to your name, right? Shame, dishonor, all of these also are strong factors that can lead to suicidal ideation as well. Now, other than that, some other risk factors include access, right? If the person has access to lethal means like firearms, poisons, tranquilizers. Now, to kind of understand this, there was in Sri Lanka, this was a feat that was done, and we are really proud of that. It was a fellow sister organization that was part of Befrienders Worldwide from Sri Lanka. Sumitrayo is an organization that worked a lot in this field, where farmer deaths was a big issue in Sri Lanka. And Sumitrayo, in collaboration with the government, what they started working on is having a locking system, right? So the pesticides, the insecticides, any poison that may be utilized in the farming community, these were placed in placed in under lock and key. And in fact, to open that lock, you would need two keys. So always access to such lethal means was restricted, so that no one person can have access to the poison or any of these lethal means, and thereby there was a reduction in the suicides that happened in the farmer community in Sri Lanka. So through this, we are able to get a lesson as well, that if a person is having suicidal thoughts, in our conversation that we are having with them, when we are exploring, we are provided them with the space to talk about suicide, we can increase and include in the conversation, even conversations up to, hey, when you said that you're having suicidal thoughts, how far had those thoughts gone? Has it gone to a point where you have now made a plan on how to die? And if there is a plan, if the person says, yes, there is a plan, then has it come to a point where they have started accumulating, started holding on, or even have they managed to get means to how they are going to die? So this is a very important question as well, because that will give us idea whether they have the availability of the means. Because if someone has the means available, again, one of the best ways to prevent that suicide would be to get that means away from them. By this, I don't mean like forcing upon the person and taking it away, but getting that person to give away those means is extremely, extremely helpful, because no means would mean no suicide as well, right? Additionally, another important risk factor, especially mentioned by WHO as well, it comes in the reporting of suicide. Now, we are all aware that when Sushant Singh Rajput's case or celebrity suicides happen, there's a lot of news that comes out. And in fact, it's not just about the news that comes out. It's not about suicide. However, the superficial aspects of suicide, that means how did the person die? What method did they use? And we get into a lot of details. And also there is this story creation around suicide that happens. There's the sensationalizing, there is glamorizing. Oh, is it because of the girlfriend not loving the person enough? Is it a mafia of the Bollywood directors coming together and harming them? And so a lot of stories can be created, making it a sensational or graphic means, which can have a bad impact on people who are experiencing heightened states of suicidal ideation, which we will be exploring in the next a few slides as well. So whenever reporting of suicide is happening, ensuring that we do not give out the means of suicide. How did the person die? Not giving details of it, however, just limiting it to the person died by suicide. No information to be given on top of that. And especially no storytelling. So another example, back in the days, there was a movie released by the name of Ek Duje Ke Liye, where if you are not aware of the story, if there are young ones in the conversation today, the story involved how a couple who were from different communities fell in love with each other. However, the family came in the way. So what they ended up doing was they died. They killed themselves by jumping off a cliff. Now, the story or the sensationalizing of it was coming in the factor that it got made aspirational, that अगर दुनिया ने हमें साथ में जीने नहीं दिया तो हम साथ में मर जाएंगे, हमारी प्रेम अमर हो जाएगी. And this kind of a value proposition, when it is added to the act of suicide and making it aspirational, sensational, these also can add to the risk factors of suicide. Historical risk factors include history of attempted suicide. Now, Rohit had mentioned that if someone has attempted suicide, then there's a 75% chance of them never attempting it again. However, attempted suicide, the other side of the story is also true, saying that if anyone has attempted suicide, there's a 25% higher chance of them attempting it again in their life. And the problem with this is, if someone has attempted suicide in the past, the following attempts, if they ever do, they tend to be more dangerous. They tend to be more violent, and the chances of them dying increases. And hence, this is to be paid attention to. Family history of suicide. Now, even though there is no genetic component that has been attached to suicide just yet, However, it is also a very common understanding in the mental health community that, for example, depression is contagious. Now, when I say this statement, it is not to be understood that depression is contagious by that someone, you talk to someone who's depressed and you start absorbing that dysphoria. That is not what we mean here. By this statement, what we mean is that if a child is being brought up in a family, and for example, if the parents are undergoing depression, right? So what that ends up doing is the coping skills that they may be presenting on a day-to-day basis while in the house may be very limited, right? Now, these coping skills that the child ends up learning from the parents sets them up in a high risk factor for developing depression themselves as well, because of the poor coping mechanisms that they may have learned. Right. So that is the only way that we are talking about this contagiousness, not to add to the stigma in any form or shape. Family history of suicide does not mean that a person will be suicidal. That is not to be considered in that manner. Childhood abuse, so past trauma, physical, sexual, or emotional, tends to play a big role in the coping mechanisms that a person may develop towards adulthood as well, right? So, and when we are talking about the pain of living, traumas do get cumulative in nature. They do get progressively worse, and there's a build-up effect that happens across over years. So any past trauma can also lead to that buildup of pain across over time. So what we may notice when interacting with a person is a case that they are presenting in front of us, right? That there is some trauma that is something that has happened in front of us, and we are able to see, oh, this person is suicidal because of this. However, what we end up neglecting is all the past trauma, pain that they are carrying with themselves till that moment as well, which does not get a light of day. So when we are talking about listening to someone and providing that space, this is to ensure that it's not just the immediate presenting factor that they are sharing, but they are able to find a space to go deep within them as well and be able to share other things that may be causing them pain as well. And finally, parental neglect as well. Now, we'll be looking into the levels of suicide or suicidal ideation. Now, when we talk about levels of suicidal ideation, I would like you to think about suicidality also exists on a spectrum, right? If you are looking at a spectrum left to right, right, over here, where there is zero, there is no suicidal ideation, to this end, where there is a suicide in progress, that means the person has taken steps to die. So this is the spectrum that we are talking about. No suicidal thoughts whatsoever, to the person attempting suicide right now, or that the person has attempted. So in this, the level 1, which will be more on this side, the level 1 includes ideation. Now, when someone is experiencing level 1 of suicidal ideation, what we are talking about are intrusive thoughts. A person does not wish upon suicide, that a person does not think and want, and by that method, suicidal thoughts starts occurring to them. No, they don't think of, let me think of suicidal thoughts. That's not what is happening. What is happening are intrusive thoughts. These are thoughts that are not in the control of the person. So for example, I have been going through a lot of pain, and I have got exams lately, and I have a strong feeling that I may fail, right? And this is also giving me the message that my future is bleak and I will not do anything good for my life, and falana falana. These things are coming up. So what it may get translated in my head is nothing has been going well for you till now, and you're also going to fail. What is the point of you even living? And this thought may come across like that, right? What I just said here, if you hear it in your head, right, this is coming across as an intrusive thought. Now, this is the level 1, where thoughts of suicide start entering the mind of a person. Thoughts of going away, not being around, wanting to die, what's the point of living? So there is a sense of hopelessness, worthlessness, uselessness, feelings of stuck that I'm really stuck. Now, these things tend to be a major factor around suicidal ideation when someone is experiencing suicidal ideation, right? So there can be a vague thought of suicide. There is no specific plan involved. And the person in this stage may express thoughts of death, suicide, or pain. And it may not always be them clearly saying that I want to die. It could be very well expressed as I want to go away. I can't take it anymore. I feel like leaving everything and moving on. So in this way as well, excuse me, even in this manner, a person may express their level 1 of suicidal ideation. Now, if that person receives support and help and is able to ventilate during that level 1, majority of the population, you're expecting that level 1 we will experience at some point of time in our life, right? That most of us, in fact, statistically, 1 out of 5 people will experience a critical upheaval of their emotions at some point of time in their life, that they will experience suicidal thoughts at some point of time in their life. And it is equally natural that they will, once they have felt it, that feeling will go away as well. However, without that support and that chronicness of the situation that they're dealing with, any mental health issues in the background, this level can move into the next level. From level 1, it can step down to a level 2, where now the person has been having these thoughts for so long that now they may start being actively involved in the ideation as well. Now, what we mean by that, this is a phase where a person may start increasing their, they may start researching how to die. What's the best way to die? So these are very common questions on Google as well, that people may end up trying to identify a painless way to die, or what's the best way to die? How can I make sure that I attempt and it will succeed? So these kind of research, the person may spend more time in these thoughts and rumination around these thoughts, and try to create a plan. So the things they tend to identify in this stage include that they may decide how to do it. That means identifying a way to die. They may identify when to die. Now, in this, for example, if anniversary dates, festival dates, all of these tend to be to be quite important for a person who tends to have suicide, who may have suicidal ideation, right? So they may decide on how they want to die. They may decide when they want to die. And finally, also collecting or collating the means on if they have decided on which way to die. For example, if hanging is the method that the person may use, decide on, then they may even look at the means. How will I do it? So they may buy a rope or get a rope and things like that. So a planning stage will start from the person actively looking at how to die and researching, to the place where they have finalized the plan, that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this on this date, and I have the means necessary to do it as well. And the signs during this time can include a lot more increase in their depression, in their mood swings, irritability and things can be quite high. They can also tend to start isolating themselves a lot more during this stage. And this is a very painful stage for them to experience as well. Okay. Now, level 3. This is the level, and again, level 2 as well. There are chances that a person may move on from level 2 if the crisis situation and everything, they get the support that they need. Then even from level 2, the person can go back to being not suicidal. However, if again, no support has been received and the chronicness of it, the isolation of it keeps on increasing, then the person may finally make that decision to die. Right? Now, around this, there was a myth discussed as well. And I'll just share that one over here again. Now, many a time, someone who's going through suicidal ideation, we mentioned how they can tend to isolate, they can show more signs of depression or irritability, frustration, stress, and things like that. However, while they are going through the suicidal ideation and a highly perturbing phase that they're experiencing, what also happens is that the perturbation of this decision of should I die or should I not die, this thing is also creating a lot of frustration. And what happens is, if a person ends up making a decision that, yes, I will die, I am going to take this step, what is normally associated with this stage is that the person may suddenly appear a lot more calmer. Once that decision on whether to die has been made, the person can show a sign of calmness. They may even show a lot more energy in interaction with the people around them and everything. But this is not coming from suicidal ideation moving away. It is coming from the relief the person is experiencing from having made a decision, if that makes sense. Right. So, so even when a person may be appearing normal or showing signs of getting better or calming down, this should not be taken as a means that the person is not having suicidal thoughts. In fact, it can be even a sign to consider that we need to be having a better lookout for the person to ensure that any such thing is happening. And our questions when we are engaging with the person should also, we should also be inquiring, hey, is this, the planning stage, has it come to a point where you have decided that you're going to die and when you're going to die, and getting these things out from the person rather than them stewing in it all alone. Right now, once this stage is reached, unless they have decided on a particular date, there is a high chance that the person may execute their plan within 48 hours. The chances of the person showing warning signs of dying, of talking more about death and them passing away and them going away, also tends to increase quite drastically in the span of 48 hours that then attempt is to be made. So a person may be more vocal during this time as well. Now, as mentioned earlier, extra vigil is required as deeply withdrawn and depressed person suddenly exhibits normal or extroverted behavior. So with that in mind, we have covered the different factors that are associated with suicide. And additionally, we have also looked at certain we have discussed the myths around suicide. We have discussed some statistics. We have looked at some risk factors that are associated with suicide, and also some ways that we can identify these things, right? The levels that are there. Any questions that you guys may have, please feel free to ask. Around 12 o'clock, we'll be starting with our next session as well.
Sachin, there were a couple of questions on self-harm. If it's okay, I will just
Sure,
scroll and go to those, and then we can continue with the other questions in the chat box.
Yes.
So, so just now Sunitha mentioned that many people are required to support. How can one help? And then there was a question, how to initiate conversation over self-harm when the person is hiding it and doesn't accept doing it. Okay. So, so when someone is hiding self-harm and doesn't accept it, it's not up to us to make them accept it or make them talk about it. So by definition, someone who is self-harming may feel a lot of reservation to open up and talk about it. As I mentioned, when we were talking about it, there may be a sense of guilt, of shame, and basically a lack of control over the pain that they are going through. So the person may even feel a complete lack of hope that even by telling about it, it's not like anyone can really help. So they may not be ready to open up to whatever pain they're going to, and they may definitely not want to share about the harm that they're causing themselves because they're very afraid of being judged or being ridiculed or being dismissed as seeking attention, all the other myths that we spoke about. So it's not up to us to make them talk about it. It's up to us to initiate a conversation and convey acceptance and respect that in case they want to talk about it, we are here to listen. And this is actually even true about suicide, because a lot of times when you are picking up signs that the person may be having thoughts of suicide and you ask them, they may say, no way, not me. it doesn't matter that they said no, and it doesn't matter that you have to make them say yes, because you probably have a lot of signs. So um, it's more important to start the conversation and convey that they can talk about it in a safe space where they won't be judged. That is the point of reaching out to the person. The locus of control, which was discussed earlier, is on that person, and that includes whether that person chooses to talk about it or not. As regards how do you involve more people, not to take it on to you are not the one person who is the go-to. I think in the chat I also saw that somebody has said that someone reaches out to them, and they have schizophrenia and they reach out to them, and during the wee hours of the morning it's very hard to provide support, and Sachin did address it to some extent. The point is that there may be a mental health component that needs to be addressed, so you need the help of mental health professionals. There may be a family issue, an underlying family issue that needs that you can just help them to talk about it, whereas you may not be able to influence or change any of the circumstances around them. So the most important thing is not that the person has to admit to doing anything or tell the truth or speak up about what they're going through. That's up to them. What you can do is to enable them and help them and empower them, to talk about whatever it is that they want. If you look at it in a way, even suicide is the ultimate act of control that the person is taking back in their life, that the one thing that I can control is my life, whether I'm alive or not. So when you are trying to pressurize the other person, you are further taking away control from them. So I'm of course talking from the point of view of the helpline and from the point of view of emotional support that we provide. I'm not talking about parents taking care of children or mental health professionals, because there are certain other issues and factors that they have to take into account at that point of time. So to allow that person to choose when and where they want to open up allows them and enables them to feel a bit more empowered about everything that they are going through. So make yourself available, convey your care and acceptance, take the help of other people. Now, if you are the recipient of this person opening up and talking to you, it could trigger your own inner pain, or it could trigger so many emotional reactions in you, as well as an overwhelmingly huge responsibility you've taken on, that you may feel, I don't know if I'll be able to be there for that person like this. Please seek help yourself. You can reach out and take help. You do not need to share any personal details of the sharing that this person has given you, but you can take help for yourself. So you need not be alone in this, providing care to that person, because that would take a toll on you and it could lead you to have a burnout as well. I hope I've answered both the questions. Sachin, over to you for the next few questions.
Sure. I think you also kind of address what are the some common mistakes people make while conversing with someone who practices self-harm.
I would like to just add a little bit from a question that had been asked in Rohit's session as well. What are the kind of things that we can say? Of course, there's no script as such, but there are some things that you can say, like, how can I help you? How can I be there for you? I'm here for you. We don't even need to speak. We can just share the space. Conveying acceptance to the other person is in non-binary ways is a very nice way. It could just be like, what can I do to help you at this point of time? What can we do to help you at this point of time? So there are a lot of things that you can say which are enabling, empowering, and positive. And then also giving them the silence and the space where they can articulate what they want to.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Sunitha. We have some thank yous in here as well. One key reason for suicide these days is the debt trap a person gets in, mainly because of the poor investment choices, failed businesses, loans that they can't pay, and the recovery agents humiliate people and put their social status compromise, leading to the extreme. Is there a way we can do anything about it? Or as an organization, what are your plans to prevent suicides of these kind? All right, now to address this, right? So one thing that we tend to kind of focus on is to understand that, again, suicide is multifactorial, right? If by that definition, what I'm trying to put in is that yes, when we look into the causes of suicide, we can see that okay, people died because relationship issues, family issues, marriage issues, and things like that as well. Now, does it mean that if my marriage is bad, then automatically I'll feel suicidal? Or if my finances have gone bad, then automatically I'll feel suicidal? Right? It is not a linear connection like that. So what we are kind of when we say that it's because of the recovery agents that the person is feeling humiliated, and that is the reason why they're having suicidal ideation. What we are kind of missing out in this conversation is that there are other factors involved as well, and not just the recovery agent. Right? Otherwise, we'll be like, okay, from now on, nobody should have a breakup because breakups can cause suicide. Nobody should be fired from their job because getting fired from the jobs can make someone suicidal. So do you understand? I hope being clear. I know this is a bit weird, right? Like someone is being bad to someone else, and if they are getting thoughts of suicide, we have to understand that it is not just that activity, just that stressor that is there, but there are other hidden factors that are also available that can include the previous traumas and pains like that as well. So when we are engaging in this conversation as an organization, what we do is we do not just go with the first thing, or we believe that we cannot change a person's living circumstances, right? We as an organization cannot change what a person is going through in life. If my mother is going through a surgery for which I need a lot of money, this is my life's problem situation that I'm experiencing. As Samaritans Mumbai, we may not be able to help a person with that. I hope that is being understood, right? So what does that mean? There is this life and suffering and issues and situations that a person can go through, which can add on to the suicidal ideation. But what we try to do is create a space where no matter what you are going through in life, you're still able to express some of the pain you're experiencing because of those life situations, right? So to understand this, imagine a person who's coming to us, or to any one of us for that matter, with suicidal ideation. Their mind is like a balloon that is, imagine if you're filled up the balloon and it's really stretching and about to burst, right? It's this about to burst wala feeling that is making them have suicidal ideation as well, because it is pain has become so much that I'm about to burst, and that's suicidal ideation. What we try to do is help them just release some of that. If you were to open that nozzle of that balloon and release some of that air out, right? What is happening? The balloon starts deflating. We don't expect the balloon to get completely deflated, right? But what it allows them to have is just some more space to handle the issues that they're currently facing. Instead of taking care of that issue, we try to focus more on the pain that they're experiencing and let that pain come out, thereby giving them that much more clarity and space in their mind to deal with their current situation. This may sound a bit convoluted. I hope it made sense. Yeah. So that's our main priority, and that goes to anyone with suicidal ideation, not with any particular stressor that we are looking at. Yes, Swapnil, sadly, today's media is making everything sensational, including suicide. Yes, and we would welcome the visitors today as well to be part of an open conversation where if you see articles in magazines, newspaper, internet, where they are describing how the suicide happened and they talk about the means and things like that, please raise your voice saying that, hey, please follow the WHO guidelines. Do not give details about suicide and do not sensationalize or glamorize suicide. And if we could ask that help of you guys, that would be very helpful in the overall awareness as well. In the social dilemma, there were some statistics about more young teenagers, ages 13 to 15, mostly girls, dying by suicide due to social media. What more can this teach us about the subject? Now, from what we understand, social media, Instagram, and other such apps, what it tends to do is also taking up our time from making connections. Now, understanding suicidal ideation, why it is happening. One of the things, a person is experiencing pain And the second part of suicidal ideation is it is a very isolating experience. It tends to isolate people by keeping them alone, right? What is happening in their life is they start excluding themselves from life, people, and things like that. So their connections drop. The lower the connection the person has, the more hopeless, disconnected, worthless, useless, and all of these things a person can feel. Right? So when we are talking about that we have a generation growing into only emoting through social media, these personal connections that are needed in a person's life to get the emotional support to sustain themselves is lacking. So the idea, the message that we can get from this committee, from the social media angle, is that we spend time on social media, but please take time to develop connections in your own life. Spend time to, if you do not have three people that you trust to talk about anything under the sun, then probably today will be the first day you start investing in making those relationships where you can have trust, and start using those relationships to emote, to share your feelings, to listen to them and help them share their feelings and things. Right. So that's our take on it. Sunitha, feel free to add something if you like.
No, I just wanted to add one thing about the reportage of suicides that you were mentioning. So just like how Sachin had spoken about how there are, when you when a movie shows suicides or 13 Reasons Why, so there are, these have a huge influence on the psyche and lead to copycat kind of suicide. So one thing that I just wanted to talk about, and when Sachin was appealing to everybody, to also intervene and to use your influence with media, so appropriate media reporting, there's something which is also called the Papageno effect, where if they actually, for example, instead of focusing on the means of suicide, like how did the person die, that should be masked so that people don't, use that in their copycat ways, because they probably already have suicide thought and ideation. But this kind of sensational reporting is allowing them to find ways and means to do it. The other thing is to really focus on survivors. Survivors, when survivors talk about what they, went through when they came out, and, how they overcame their suicidal thoughts or maybe recovered from it, that can also have a very positive effect. So just remember that it's not just about focusing on only the sensational part, but also focusing on the other aspect. That's all I wanted to add. So if you can keep that in mind as well, that will really go a long way in helping us to start conversations and to, keep conversations going as well.
Thank you. There's a question: is parental neglect equal to giving someone full authority to doing whatever they want, including suicide? Now, when we talk about parental neglect, we are specifically talking about emotional neglect. That means a person may have physical and emotional needs as well. A child growing up relies on their parents to learn coping skills on how to deal with failures, on moments where there are difficult and emotionally upheaval. There's an upheaval of emotions caused, right? So parental neglect is more in terms of, is the child being supported through these crises that they may experience themselves. Now, offering, being open with the child, that the child has decision to take and has the autonomy for it, that's a different thing as compared to parental neglect. Okay. If the person has told a close relative of their plan, a pain and plan, do we keep the family informed, and how? Now, one may consider that, okay, now this is an important point, right? If someone close to you has come in and told you that I have suicidal ideation, in fact, I have thought of doing it today, do you see that you are not in a situation anymore not to share it with anyone? Right? Very often people who get told that they are having suicidal ideation end up making a promise that I will not tell it to anyone. But please understand, if on a personal one-on-one basis, if you have a WhatsApp message where the person has said, I'm going to do this right now, do you really think you will not feel the fear of police finding that WhatsApp message, for example, of that person's parents finding out that they had reached out to someone for help and they didn't do anything? right? So this autonomy, this self-determination that we are offering them, please understand, as a clinical psychologist and all of that, if you're a psychologist, professional counselor and things, you're able to offer that confidentiality, right? Because you're working and talking in a setup that adds anonymity or confidentiality as part of the package. But when you're dealing with someone one-on-one, sometimes it may become impossible for you to carry with that promise. And hence, managing those expectations is very important. If you are someone who's supporting someone going through suicidal ideation, maybe one of the things you may also need to address is that adding more people into this conversation, right? If such a thing happens, you may need to know what that person's family's number is so that you can get in touch with them in case if such an action is happening, so that they can intervene and do something about it. How a helpline works, how you work as a mental health professional is very different from something happening in your own life on a personal level. So please do think about it a bit more as well. I hope that answered that. We have our next speaker available, come in as well. Lynn, just give us one moment. We are just quickly going through the last few questions. How does one act or respond if we have picked up signs when the decision has been made? Well, that's a great question. In fact, Lynn is here to answer that part of the question itself. So I will not take that away from her. She will be going ahead with that. Swapnil has commented, I think mainly society making a big difference in suicide decision. Yes, cannot agree more. Suicide is no longer a mental health issue by itself. It is a societal issue. And it is not just the responsibility or duties of experts and mental health professionals to get involved, but each and every single one of us can do something in this field, and we can make a change. So I would welcome and invite everyone to, take a stand in this.
Can I take the next one, Sachin?
Yes, please go ahead.
The guilt and shame that surface with self-harm could be very different, as I understand. How can we hold space in this purview? So the guilt and shame that surfaces with self-harm could be very different, and that could be also one of the reasons why in the earlier question that was asked that they don't want to talk about it, or they don't want to reveal it very openly. So how we hold space, and this is from our experience in the helpline, as well as when we do outreaches into community and to engage with and talk to youngsters, what we have found is when we raise the topic and when we are showing an acceptance towards the person to open up, they have found that they have been able to open up. Of course, I'm talking not at an individual level, because an individual one-on-one is very different from community outreaches. So the best thing that you can offer to help them to overcome the guilt and shame that they feel is to show them the respect and acceptance. They continue to matter as they are, with no judgments, and they continue to enjoy your respect for who they are and what they are going through. So to not trivialize their pain, to not jump into judgments like, you're a coward or you're weak, or, you can't do that, that is wrong. So no value judgments or judgments of any kind, but to remain calm and not to panic and to say, oh my God, you're doing this, because that makes them retreat even more, with your shock. So I understand that in your daily life, it may not be easy if someone close to you is self-harming and you find out. There is a sense of shock and a sense of, your own reactions. So to be aware that in that moment, it is their pain that is important, and, their guilt and shame that they are working through to have even opened up to this extent. Let them talk about it. Convey acceptance and empathy. Just let them speak about it. You don't need to give them solutions. You don't need to fix them in that first talk. Just let them understand that the guilt and shame that they had to overcome to even open up so much is not something that's going to define them. So conveying that acceptance is really how you can hold a space in this purview. Over to you, Sachin.
Thank you, Sunitha. And with that, I hope that answered the question. And we can leave some more questions towards the end.